clickbait title? Well, alright. But if you think about it, is the title of the video really that inaccurate? Is it? Going in, I knew there were going to be 3 different factors to watch out for, any one of which could just break Doctor Strange 2 real easily. America Chavez, Wanda taking over the whole movie, and the movie itself being about the multiverse, a concept I was never crazy about in the first place and have grown absolutely sick of for a lot of reasons. Well, those 3 factors did play a big role in this, and the results are kind of mixed. First, America Chavez. Absolute bottom-of-the-barrel garbage character in the comics. They brought in this idiot who I think had never even worked in comics before to write a solo series for her, and it was so f***ing awful they had to retcon the entire thing just to make the character tolerable when the movie came out. Well, here's the good news. America Chavez in the movie? Not bad. Honestly, this was the most likable, least intolerable version of the character I've seen. Feige clearly looked at the comics and was like, oh, this noise, we can't put that in the movie, they'll laugh us out of the damn theater. And then he did some rejiggering. And he didn't change anything to get up in arms about. She's still got her 2 moms and her dimension-hopping powers, so don't worry about that. But guess what? She's not copping an attitude, she's not screaming about her holy menstruation, she's not going on about some bullshit home planet populated entirely by lesbians. She's just a good kid who's in trouble and needs help. She's not massively OP either. If anything, her powers from the comics were dialed back a few notches. And she doesn't have to do a ton of heavy lifting acting-wise, but what she does matters. The actress is charming enough. They knew which parts of the character would work and which parts they needed to drop like a hot potato. So I went in being afraid that America Chavez was gonna ruin this whole thing, and I left thinking, you know what? She was fine. I liked her. If they want to bring her back for more movies, I'm cool with it. Go right ahead. So that's a point in the movie's favor. So far, so good. Then we've got Wanda. I know a lot of people were concerned about what the movie would do with her, especially after WandaVision ended the way it did. Oh, poor Wanda! All those people you mentally enslaved will never know what you gave up for them! Yeah, I don't think they care, dudes. You know, because of the mental enslavement, how she was basically torturing these people for months. Yeah, we were meant to feel bad for Wanda in that situation, but some wires definitely got crossed along the way. A lot of people had problems with it. So that story was setting her up for what she would do in this movie. And yes, you will need to have seen WandaVision to understand what's going on here. People were worried that the character was gonna keep going down that road and get ruined, and she was gonna take over the whole film and shove Doctor Strange into the back seat. I didn't really think so. I figured she'd be the catalyst for bad stuff to go down, and she might be the shit stirrer who's causing everything, but it's still gonna be Strange's movie. Well, I think people on both sides will need to eat a slice of humble pie on this one. There does seem to have been a little bit of tinkering with her character since WandaVision, because she's definitely gone further down that path, but we're not meant to be on her side anymore. Wanda is very much the villain now. She's still got sympathetic motivations, but they're not trying to absolve her anymore. They're making no bones about it. What she's doing is wrong, it's horrific, and really, really f***ed up. She has to be stopped. Period. And I'm not gonna say it makes up for the way they treated her with kid gloves in WandaVision, but this felt like a course correction that was very welcome and very effective. Yeah, they hit a bump in the road getting her there, but the results are good. As a hero, she was cool, but as a villain, she's fucking terrifying. It doesn't excuse the walking plot device the comics have a habit of making her out to be, but turns out Wanda really is the most compelling when she's a goddamn psychopath. She straight up murders a lot of innocent people, making like an engine of destruction, letting nothing and no one stop her from getting what she wants, obliterating anyone who gets in her way, and it's awesome. But the issue then becomes that the movie gets so carried away with Wanda and her story that it does kind of feel more like her movie than Strange's a lot of the time. Strange still gets his arc and everything, but there's no getting around that he is kind of overshadowed by the force of nature that is is the Scarlet Witch, as is everybody else. And I think the problem is that for this to work better, they needed to tie Strange's arc more closely into Wanda's somehow. Like, what she's going through needed to inform and affect his journey, not just in the plot, but in his character development, so that could all be one big through line, one big theme to base the movie on, and it doesn't really. Strange's development is kind of a separate thing. So instead of Doctor Strange and the Scarlet Witch going on this crazy journey together, it's more like Wanda going apocalyptically dark, and Strange is also there doing his own stuff. And since Wanda's role is the more flashy, attention-grabbing one, you can guess how that shakes out. And for most of the movie, I didn't even really mind this so much because what Wanda was doing was so good. But once you reach the climax, it's like, okay, I understand the story you're telling here, but whose movie is this supposed to be, guys? Come on. So, bottom line, Wanda's an awesome villain, but if your villain is overshadowing your hero, you may have gotten carried away. This is supposed to be a Doctor Strange movie after all. And factor number 3, the one I was most worried about, the multiverse. This is a concept that, when used carefully, in small doses, can be a fun storytelling device. But when you overdo it, when you get carried away with it, almost every time, without fail, it becomes a storytelling crutch and a paper-thin excuse for the writers to get really lazy and fall back on the novelty of different versions of characters and new costumes they can pimp out for new action figures and all that other cheap crap, rather than actually telling a good story. Check out What If for all the proof you need on that. And What If sucked, okay? Don't at me. I've got a whole playlist on the channel where I went into that at length. So the idea that What If was teeing up some concepts and characters that they might potentially use in this movie, and yes, that does happen, didn't exactly thrill me. But again, I'm gonna give the movie credit on this because I was pleasantly surprised by the restrained approach they took to the multiverse. There are a lot of crazy possibilities that can happen with it, but that's mostly covered in one absolutely bonkers montage sequence, and after that, the multiverse stuff is all taking place on one alternate Earth, which they then try to focus on. So they almost put the concept before the story, but then they didn't, which is good, but even then, it still comes close to derailing things, because then the Illuminati show up, of course. Some of them were spoiled in the advertising, and some were surprises, and this is where the movie starts getting pretty crowded and becomes slightly unglued, because it's a big group, so you did kind of need to get them in and get them out, and not all of them get the best treatment. Professor Xavier makes out the best. He gets a lot of respect, and there's a nod to X-Men the Animated Series in there that put a huge grin on my face. You'll know it when you hear it. That gave me a lot of hope for the future of the X-Men in the MCU. But the other ones... oh boy. 2 of them get treated like punks, and it's the wrong 2. One in particular just baffled me, because that's an important character played by an actor fans have been clamoring for. That character is gonna be a pretty big deal in a future MCU project you've already announced, so you should probably protect them to some extent, right? And that character gets completely shafted here, so they could instead give the big flashy sequence to the wrong 2 characters. The characters who were clearly just there for the novelty of it. I think you know which ones, and the reasons why. But thankfully, when your villain is the Scarlet Witch, those reasons don't matter very much at all. And I mean that in a good way. So in some ways, the Illuminati are cool because there's a story to be told with certain members of the group, which is effective, but it also gets dumb and pandering and short-sighted with some of the others, which I had no patience for, but they do manage to keep the focus on the important stuff for the most part. So you've got America Chavez, Scarlet Witch, and the multiverse. There's some hits and misses, stuff I wish had been done differently for sure. I won't say they nailed everything, they didn't, but there's nothing here that's going to aggressively break the movie beyond repair. That said, how's the rest of it? It's very busy. The first act has way too much fucking CG, I'm sorry. From minute 1, there's dimensional portals and illusions and otherworldly monstrosities and a giant octopus throwing buses around. It's a massive, unrelenting CG fest, and it got tiresome really quickly. I'm serious. Opinions may vary, but for me, it was just too damn much. And they dial back on that in Acts 2 and 3, and everything sort of settles in from there, but I'm pretty sure I know what all the reshoots were about. They were trying to retool Act 1, and you can tell because it feels so different compared to 2 and 3, and the pacing is a lot wonkier too. Most of that is fixed once you get through Act 1, but they were definitely throwing too much at the wall for a minute there. Also, there comes a point where the movie crosses into "it's magic, we don't have to explain it" territory. That's when magic stops having rules and limits and becomes something you're just doing because it looks cool. Up until now, the MCU has been really good about keeping Strange's powers within reason. Like, the magic is pretty out there, but it's in enough of a box that you can suspend your disbelief that there'd be a spell a sorcerer would have to learn to do this thing or that thing. But here, there's a couple of scenes where it really just feels like the movie is dangling something shiny in front of you and hoping you're distracted long enough that you don't think too much about what's going on. That's where the line is, Marvel. Back it up a little bit. But something I really appreciated was how dark it got. With one or two exceptions, the MCU has tried to stay really homogenized, with all the movies having a similar tone and a similar style of humor. Recently, they've been trying to differentiate things a little bit. They tried it with Eternals, it didn't work. This time, I think they got it right. I've even heard some people say this is Marvel's first horror movie. I wouldn't go that far. It's a fantasy movie with dark themes and dark moments, but horror? No. And I don't think it needed to be horror. Frankly, Wanda's scary enough without playing the Hellraiser card or whatever. So the movie is able to dip its toes in a different pool while still fitting the MCU mold. And I think that's the formula to making this work with other projects in the future. So how is Multiverse of Madness overall? That's complicated. It relies very heavily on Scarlet Witch going full dark, no stars to give it all its momentum, and it does get a lot of momentum from that, but it's so much that the multiverse concept itself doesn't get presented as carefully as I was hoping because Wanda kind of overshadows everything. The story is more interested in Wanda using the multiverse to achieve what she's trying to achieve than it is with the multiverse itself, so it does feel transparently gimmicky with some of the Illuminati stuff. And honestly, if they wanted to tell this story, then I wish they'd just given Scarlet Witch her own movie. I'm not gonna say Doctor Strange feels like a guest star here, but Wanda's really the one driving the plot, so that does kind of feel like the movie they wanted to make anyway. And to be fair, I can see why. But they were also able to come up with a version of America Chavez that casual fans might actually want to get on board with. That's a check in the win column. There are some absolutely insane visuals in this thing. Really jaw-dropping stuff that looks even better once they get the CG under control and pull the reins back a little bit. And like I said, Strange does still get his story told here. It just feels a little secondary compared to everything else that's going on. Multiverse of Madness feels like a movie that was made because a lot of plot elements in the MCU had been spending a long time converging and building up to this big Scarlet Witch story, which needed to get paid off, and I guess a Doctor Strange movie was the most appropriate vehicle for it to happen in, outside of her just getting her own movie. And as impactful as the Wanda story is, most of the non-Wanda related stuff ends up as in everything but the kitchen sink, look at all the crazy stuff that's happening type of narrative. There's a story in there with Strange and Christine that I quite liked, and that does come through despite all the craziness, and Strange and America Chavez together made for a surprisingly likable duo, but in the grand scheme of things, this feels a little more like a story that exists because there was a big MCU plot that had to be addressed and some concepts that had to be introduced than a proper Doctor Strange sequel. For Strange, this was a bit of a stopgap where we're gonna tie up a couple things with him, move some pieces around the board, and get him ready for his next big adventure, which will be able to be more Strange-centric because it won't have to spend time on all the stuff Multiverse of Madness was dealing with. So I liked a lot of things in this movie. Parts of it it are extremely cool. It's definitely one of the darker offerings in the MCU, which I got a kick out of, but it does have some notable chinks in the armor. There's a lot of good in there, but I think they were having some trouble ironing out the story and figuring out which elements they needed to zero in on. I prefer the first Doctor Strange movie to this, to be honest. Multiverse of Madness is definitely bigger and a lot more ambitious, but the first one just felt more focused. So hopefully, now that they've cleared the table, so to speak, we can get back to that approach the next time we see this character. Thanks everyone for watching. Let me know what you thought about Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness down below. Ding the bell icon and follow my social media so you can always be notified when I upload new stuff. Links to that and to my live streaming channel are down below. And most importantly, don't forget to hit that thumbs up, share, subscribe, and make sure you're still subscribed, because what really deserves to be hunted across the multiverse by a murderous, magic-wielding lunatic is the YouTube algorithm. That's all for now, but I'll be back with more soon, so stay tuned for that, do all the YouTube things, and I'll see you next time.